This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Weather My Trains. Hey, are you like me and the thought of doing a DIY weathering job on an expensive engine leaves you in fear? It's time to call in Rob Arsenault at Weather My Trains. Do what thousands of satisfied customers have done and let Rob help you notch up the realism on your layout with beautifully detailed weathering on your locomotives and rolling stock. To see what Rob can do for you, check out his website at weathermytrains.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Coming to us from the volunteer state of Tennessee, Shane Wilson. Shane, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. Good evening. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, it's great to see you again. And yet another person I saw in Texas during the 2023 NMRA National Convention. I've dropped Texas Express because you can see how I slow down and say it. That was a tongue twister that I still can't get over, but it was great to see you down there. First place I saw you, the BNSF headquarters tour. That was quite a treat.
Well, that was amazing. The art collection there. I'd heard about it, but boy, until you see it, it is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, it was quite something to see the collection they had, and then the access they gave us was phenomenal. And the folks that put that together from the convention staff, and I know Michelle Kempema was a big part of that as well. And just awesome to be able to go in and see something like that. We'd never be able to see outside of something, like a national convention and have that access, go by boardrooms. And of course, the National Operations Center was phenomenal. That was quite a treat to see that.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And we actually made a couple of contacts while we were there too, which is great.
Yeah, first that's awesome. And then the tour of Alliance Yard and be able to ride the bus and see how the intermodal yard worked. And that was definitely a treat. So really awesome access BNSF gave us, and really cool the convention committee putting that together and giving us the opportunity to see that. So we did that, and then literally you set up camp at the National Train Show, and that was quite a treat to see you there with the fifth wheel in the building and serving s'mores and talking about ScaleTrains.
I'll tell you what, that was pretty amazing. And if you didn't hear the story, it almost didn't happen at the last minute. There was some internal miscommunications there at the convention center, and boy, they had the convention center chief and one of the higher ups at the hotel, and they had the fire marshal and other people and security. But we were able to talk our way in, and they let us bring it in for the show. And I'll tell you what, it was pretty stunning. No matter where you were in the show, you knew where the ScaleTrains booth was.
That's for sure. You look for the big RV and look for the big crowd you had around as people were checking stuff out. Did you have any big announcements at the National Train Show for ScaleTrains?
We did. Holly, Ray, you're putting me on the spot. We had SD45X in HO.
Yeah.
And then we had some other supporting releases as well. So, man, I'm getting older. My memory's not there.
I hear you, but you pulled it up, and it was certainly quite a crowd around the ScaleTrains booth, around the RV, around the campfire, as people were checking out a lot of the new models that were coming out and some of the previously released stuff as well. It was great to see you there, and I had a great time. I trust that you had a great time as well in Texas, and we certainly were able to find the air conditioning and try to stay as cool as possible down there. So.
Man, I'm telling you what, this trip this summer, of course, that was at the back end of the road trip, coming from a full haul to the West Coast in California and coming back. And I think from the middle of July till the end of August, we didn't see a day probably under 95 for a high. In fact, when we were in Vegas, the truck had a temperature of 120 on it. It was a hot summer.
It was certainly hot. It was certainly hot down in Texas. Making the trek back, I stayed out in Bridgeport, Texas, because I was staying with my grandparents. Very blessed to still have them and got to spend some time with them and trains. That's so kind of awesome. Best of both worlds. But 10 o'clock at night, it was still 100 degrees down in Texas. It was unreal. I've never seen anything like that. And quite honest, I think I'm going to be going back there in the spring and the fall. I think the summer's a good time to sit it out. And I think that one of the takeaways from that was August is one to stay up here in the north where I'm a little.
We did the road trip in February and March in Texas. Got to go through pretty much the whole state. It was gorgeous that time of year. Temperatures were perfect.
Yeah, definitely a better time to be down there. So most folks know you as the president of ScaleTrains, but tonight I'm looking forward to hearing your story and getting to know you a little better and learning about the road that led to ScaleTrains. So let's start right at the beginning of the journey. Let me ask, how'd you get started in the model railroad hobby?
Well, I've been into model trains or trains since I was a little kid. I can't even honestly remember when. I do remember my first train set, though. I was probably about 4 years old. And if you go way back in time, there was a company called Airway. They had a Marx train set. And that's the one thing I really wanted for Christmas that year. I ended up getting that set. And that was what started it all. And it just so happened that my best friend, as a young boy who lived next door, he was into O-Gauge and had Lionel too. So we would get together and we'd play trains a ton. And of course, over time that evolved. I got into HO a little bit later, probably around 10 years old, and had a 4x6 in my bedroom. And then that grew to a half basement size layout in my teens. And then also did some in-scale modeling in my mid-teens. And then have really migrated back to HO. And that's really where most of my equipment is. You can see actually just behind me, it's up on the shelf. Do have some 2-rail scale O, but most of what I do now is in HO.
I'm not sure. Are you a native? I guess it would be Tennessean, right? Are you native of Tennessee, or where did you grow up?
I grew up in central Illinois, in a town named Danville, which was a big train town. My dad actually worked for the Chicago New Illinois Railroad before I was born.
Wow.
And then we moved to near Champaign. So that'd been along the Illinois Central and near the Norfolk Southern, east-west Maine. So trains have always been a part of what I've done since I was a little kid. It's pretty neat too. After my father passed when I was 13, some guys took me under their wing at a local model railroad club called the Danville Junction chapter in Rossville, Illinois. And boy, they had a huge railroad in the baggage room and learned how to do block railroading back then. I think we had about 6 different cabs, and the magic of trying to keep multiple trains moving in multiple directions, that was always a pretty big challenge.
Yeah, so a club influence on you from a young age there, learning the hobby and then learning it obviously from others in that club atmosphere.
Yeah, that's really where I think the lifelong bug was really bit me. I had a great gentleman by the name of Larry Prosser. We'd have a meeting at the local firehouse on the third Thursday of every month, and we'd go and they do the club business. And then, of course, in those days, you'd watch. There'd be a slide presentation, somebody taking a vacation and gone somewhere, or you get the occasional Pentrex or Green Frog, reel to reel back then.
Yeah,
and that kind of dates me, right?
Yeah,
and we would, and then in the summertime, the museum was open from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and volunteer a couple of weekends in the summer to help with the guests that would come through the museum. And they had lots of really cool artifacts from the CDI and other railroads in central Illinois. So a lot of history there. Got a lot of great admiration for those guys. And in fact, at our original building, which is ScaleTrains building, we have the signals that we took out of the attic of that old depot back in that's probably been the early 80s.
Wow.
And preserved those, and they're now up in front of the old business.
That's great. That's great to be able to hold on to that piece of history. Now, you say, growing up where you are, it's always location when it comes to, where you grow up and the things you see. And boy, you had a great spot to see, the prototype going by and spend some time. Did you have a favorite railroad growing up?
I spent a lot of time on the N&W because I could ride my old 10-speed bicycle and go over to the yard, and there was an overpass and sit there and watch the trains quite a bit. And then I had family that worked for the L&N through the CSX merger. So I've actually have a fictitious bridge line that I've designed, haven't built yet. There's just no time, unfortunately. But it's a fictitious bridge of the CSX in the mid-'80s with that kaleidoscope of colors. You have L&N and Chessie and then Seaboard Coastline and Family Lines and Seaboard System, all of that. And then that's at one end, and it's a mushroom style layout. The other end's got Norfolk Southern at the time of the merger too, so N&W and Southern Equipment, and that way it's coal line, so it's loosely based on the Pocahontas, and that way we could run some big coal trains and run a lot of interchange power.
When did you start to come up with this bridge line concept? Has this been something that in your mind for quite a while or something recent?
It's been in for quite a while. When we moved to Tennessee, one of the requirements for me was a large basement. So I've got about probably 1,500 square feet devoted to what the railroad will be someday.
Yep.
And so, we've mapped it all out. And I've probably been working on the concept for more than a decade, probably before we moved. And collecting equipment, there's quite a bit of equipment over my left shoulder on the bookcase and getting ready for that day someday, but it won't be anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, the dreams that you have, but I'm sure you'll get there and you've got a plan in your head. But when you get back to your teenage years, you talked about having HO and then you dabbled a little bit with N. Kind of curious, what kind of took you away to N scale for a bit? What was the draw there?
It's one of those things where a neighbor was just a little bit older than me, and maybe 2-3 years, and he had quite a bit of in-scale equipment. And of course, he was in high school, and I wasn't yet, so the girl bug and all that stuff bit. And he was ready to sell his in-scale equipment, and I ended up buying it all, and so that kind of got me started there. And I still have quite a bit of in there. For a while, I was modeling chassis, and so I've got a lot of older Atlas equipment, Kato equipment, and chassis. But it's all stored in the closet, and I don't, someday I'll probably sell it all off because I don't have any intentions of going back. As I get older, it gets a lot harder to see. Yeah.
Well, it's still neat that you still have it. So you dabble with N scale, HO scale in your teenage years. And then where does that take us next on the Shane Wilson timeline?
Well, I somehow convinced my mom when I was 15 that there was a local hobby store called Railfan Hobby Shop in a little town in Indiana, just across the Wabash. And they were closing their store. They were wanting to spend more time with their kids. They were growing up. And somehow I talked my mom into buying their leftover inventory and started a hobby store then about a week before I turned 16.
Wow.
And ran that for about 4 years, maybe 5. It actually ended up it started in our house and moved to a retail location on a really main drag in Danville, Illinois. And as that grew, it became really obvious that, if I was ever going to make any money at it, we had to make a pretty substantial investment. And when you're about 20 something and you're looking at, in those days, $100,000 to really get anywhere with the store, and how would the bank ever loan that kind of money anyway to somebody of that age? It was like, nah, it's time to move on. Yeah. So I sold insurance for a year and realized that no one wants to buy insurance from a 20-something-year-old kid. And so then I moved on. I actually went to work for Hobby Dynamics Distributors. And if you might remember Circus Casinos in Vegas,
yep.
Their owner was Bill Bennett, and he had started a distributorship back, that had been like late 80s, early 90s. And I started it in Champaign, Illinois. And that was a big competitor to Great Plains at the time, or Great Plains Hobbico. And Bill just did it as a tax write-off. But I ended up going to work there in sales. They were really heavy into radio control at the time. And then just over a year after I'd been there, got these rumblings that Bill Bennett was coming to town. He'd never been to Champaign since the beginning of the company. So, something was pretty big. And so I put my application at the other big distributor, and that was Horizon Hobby. And come to find out, lo and behold, about a month later, Horizon bought Hobby Dynamics. So that made for an awkward moment. And but came over the merger, and that would have been, I started in 91, came in the merger in 92, helped bring model railroad to Horizon back in 90, when was that? About 96. And did that as a buyer, category manager, purchasing manager, sales manager, all through that whole process. I actually had a team of 8 people devoted to selling model trains to retailers, wholesale customers. And back in 04 was part of the team that helped acquire Ather.
Wow.
And then in 05 on the MDC Roundhouse acquisition, the McHenry acquisition. And we really grew the business back in Horizon. Back in those days, there was a lot of focus on model railroading. Grew it to actually become the second largest hobby distributor of model trains in the country, just behind Walthers.
Yeah.
And then we even started Horizon Hobby Trains. That was probably in the early 2000s. And I think it was a little too premature. Horizon wasn't ready to take the backlash from retailers at that point, and ended up shutting that division down. Horizon's still really strong in RC. And then back in 93, 2013, the opportunity came along for ScaleTrains, and it all came together and left Horizon and Athearn in 2014. And here we are today. That's the Cliff Notes version.
That's the Cliff Notes version, but I'm going to dive into this because you said something that already has fascinated me. And for anybody that's listened to the podcast, I have this just passion and admiration for entrepreneurship. And you started that at 16 years old, to starting a hobby shop. And I want to rewind back to just to celebrate that for just that thought of, obviously convincing mom, like you said, was quite a task. But 16 years old, you're managing a bit of inventory. You've purchased out this other brick and mortar location, and you're starting to sell. Talk about the marketing side of it. I mean, this is kind of pre-internet. I'm, dating that. So we don't have we can't put up a website. Talk about how you go to market at 16 years old. And is it kind of just, the friend network, or how are you finding people and selling to them?
In the early days, was really connected with the Model Railroad Club, and we did a lot of local shows. And I'll tell you what was pretty amazing. So this club that I was a member of, we would do a model train show every year, and it was the weekend after Thanksgiving. So it had been we're coming up on Thanksgiving here, and in those days I took it for granted, but I didn't really understand really what we as a team and the guys that were really worked hard on this show accomplished. We'd rent the local civic center, and there was always a Christmas parade, and the parade ended with Santa Claus. And then after the parade, everybody would come over to the civic center.
Yeah.
Well, in those days, we were drawing 8,000 people on a weekend.
Wow.
And to go and talk to people today, 8,000 people for a show is a big train show.
That's a huge number.
For most places, and not really realizing what we had created at that point. And so, we got really well introduced to the local community because we were heavily involved in the show. And then we would do other local shows throughout Central Illinois and even get over to Western Indiana a little bit. And that was one of the ways we got our name out. And then there was, we do some print advertising, although it was pretty expensive to be in the local newspaper back in those days. But around the holidays, we would do some advertising there. We tried some radio. Didn't really work very well for us. I think one of the things, you learn a lot because when you're that age, you don't have a lot of experience and rely too much on brand name and not as much on the experience looking back. But that's okay. But it was a great educational experience. We were small. It was never going to be this huge company. And it had grown. We started model railroading. And of course, you think back into the 80s, radio control cars had just really come onto the scene. So in those days, it was Tamiya, and we stocked Tamiya and the old Blackfoot and the Frog and the Hornet, and Grasshopper, all that. Did some rocketry, did some slot cars, did some plastic models. Didn't really have a ton of anything, just a smattering of things, but it was enough to, sustain a kid in his 16 to was about 20 years old or so, and put food on the table and put gas in the car. But it wasn't really going to grow to be anything unless we made a huge investment in inventory.
Well, I bet you all those lessons you learned back then certainly have paid off now. And you hinted earlier that you lost your father at a young age, and I'm sure you had to grow up fast. And that's kind of, leading into at 16, you're in business and learning all these principles that people don't even really, some people that are twice or three times that age don't get, and how to bring things to market.
Well, my mom and dad were both entrepreneurs. My mom was a beautician and my dad was a barber, and they had built essentially a garage, but didn't put doors on it. So it was at our home, and one half was my dad's barber shop, and the other half was my mom's beauty shop. So growing up as a kid, I was always around them from a business perspective, and understood what it was like to work for yourself. My dad actually worked a day job. He worked for the VA as a barber, and then he would come home at night and work in his barber shop and work on Saturdays. So I think that work ethic was instilled in me at a young age.
Well, it's great to be around, and you obviously have picked up that work ethic. And I was thinking about you talking about from 16 to 20, banging around all these train shows and trying to push it. I bet you didn't have anything as nice as that fifth wheel to travel in when you were doing those.
No, it's pretty funny. You'll laugh. I had can't remember what year, but it was an early 80s Mustang hatchback.
Yep.
And I figured out how to pack that hatchback and could get a pretty good chunk in the store, in the back seat and into the trunk. So
I could see you driving that Mustang, everything packed, and maybe up around the sides you a little bit too.
Oh yeah, it was full. Yeah.
Yeah, but out there getting it done, and that's a pretty wild story. So you this hobby shop, you've had that experience now at that brick and mortar level, and learning and what it's like to be at the foot of the customer, and learning from them as you were going along, and you take these lessons, and now you're with Horizon, and you take that, and that's just an incredible story. I mean, that projection of coming from 16 years old, starting that model railroad as a career projection.
Well, it taught me a lot of respect for the hobby retailer, and what a retailer, especially going back into the 80s and 90s, the pre-internet era.
Yeah.
And what those folks had to do to be successful. They really had to, not to say that folks today don't bust it hard, but when you don't have an outlet like the internet or eBay or a website or something like that to really service that local community, holy smokes, I had a ton of respect and admiration for the successful dealers that were able to do that, because they made a tremendous financial commitment, time commitment, and a life commitment. I mean, it was their life at that point. And it really helped me to be able to understand. I started out in wholesale sales when I first started at Hobby Dynamics and moved over to Horizon. So knew what it meant to have products that turn and sell and have the latest, greatest RC car or whatever it might be to make sure that retailer was had the best opportunity to make money.
Yeah. So that again, that grassroots experience, and again, being able to take that with you from, like you said, through Athearn. How does the whole ScaleTrains thing start to birth? Where does that concept start to come from as you're, in that part of your career?
So back in the summer of 2013, Mike Hopkin, who was the director of product development at Athearn, by that point, I was the marketing manager at Athearn. I was in Central Illinois. Mike was in Southern California. And we would go and do shows. And, when you're spending 12, 15 weekends a year with somebody, you get to know them pretty well. And Mike and I got to be very good friends. And we were at the National Train Show in Atlanta. Not quite sure how we got on the topic, but it was like, wouldn't it be really cool if we could start our own model train company? And that's the seed that got planted. And it started to germinate throughout that summer and into the fall, and I wrote a business plan that in the fall of that year, and some of the things made sense, some of it didn't, but there were some ideas too that things that we always wanted to do at Athearn but just couldn't get off the ground, and it was a chance. Like, man, those projects that we've always wanted to do, if we start our own company, we could do them. And if we could come up with the money, that was the big challenge.
Sure.
But it all started to come together, and pieces of the puzzle started to happen. And we approached Joe Alvera. Joe was the art director at Athearn. He was the guy responsible for putting on the paint schemes and overseeing the team that did that. And that happened at Train Fest in Milwaukee in 2013. And Joe, and he was instantly yes when we made the presentation to him. And then after we'd gone to China and come back and learned we had a ton more capacity, that was in February of 2014, we approached Paul Ellis about a month later. And Paul was the one of the project managers, product developers at Athearn, the lead guy for locomotives. And Paul took some time to think about it, but eventually came on board. And then we left in May of 2014. And really, for the first 18 months, because of a non-compete agreement that could have been enforced against me, the guys in California, they didn't have to really worry about it. But being in Illinois, I did. It's one of the reasons for the move to Tennessee.
Yeah.
We could prepare to do business, but we couldn't sell anything. And it worked out great anyway, because that gave us 18 months to kind of just be quiet and develop the turbine project and the tank cars and the water tenders and the box car. And, we even got started on the 40-2 and the -9 and some other things during that time frame. And it just allowed us to work and get a lot done, get several things in the pipeline. So that when we announced the company, there would be quite a bit to follow on from there.
I'm sure your entrepreneurial spirit was what drove you to ScaleTrains and this idea. But did you see at that point something missing in the market that you wanted to fulfill, that you wanted to deliver? Was that part of that, is that drive to start ScaleTrains?
Well, it's funny. It's a great question, because when Mike and I first really got serious about the conversation, one of the things I told Mike, I said, Mike, you know what? We work for a great company. We've both been there a long time. Yeah, there's projects we want to do and there's frustrations, but every job has those things. And if we're going to leave, I don't want to do this to be a Me Too model railroad company. I don't want to take this risk, put my family's livelihood on the line, and just do this to make the same model trains. And that's really where that was kind of the birth of the Rivet, or of the museum quality line. And it was kind of funny. One of the great stories is Mike and I were at a dinner one time, and I said, write down your 3 projects you want to do first. And I'll write down my 3 projects, and we'll slide those napkins across the table. And if they match, that's what we'll do. And number 1 on both of our lists was the big blow turbine.
Yep.
Number 2 on both of our lists was the SD40-2. And number 3 on my list was the -9. I don't remember Mike's at this point, but that's where the turbine came from. And it was like, look, if we're going to do the turbine, let's do things that have never been done before. So on those first projects, the first project, of course, was the big blow turbine. And we chose that project because we could do some things that were absolutely innovative and groundbreaking at the time. You look at the class lights, and you could cycle between red, white, green, and off. The interior light, control stand light with the printed gauges, the ground light on the engineer's side. There was the backup light on the A unit. You had the spinning turbine fan blade, the doors on the turbine that you could slide open on the B unit and actually see the jet turbine inside. And then, of course, it had that big leather-like presentation box that really made a statement. And we were really going to really push that tech side. And it's pretty amazing. I mean, if you look at it, here we are, almost 9 years later since we started the company, coming up on 10 actually. Things like class lights are standard now. Ground lights are standard. Interior lighting is starting to become a standard. So a lot of those things that we pushed the envelope there that first time now are just a part of the marketplace every day. So it kind of challenges. It's like, what's the next thing that we can do to be innovative? And it's getting a lot harder, because as we push locomotives and freight cars about as far as we can go, there's a few more tricks up our sleeve that we're working on, but there's not much frontier left in that particular part of the marketplace.
It must be quite a undertaking to live up to that innovative ScaleTrains slogan, right? It's beyond just, I want to do X or add X. There's got to be this process along the way. Talk about those kind of challenges of between coordination and everything else. I'm sure it's quite an undertaking.
Well, innovative for us is not just product related. You go back to the early days and you look at the Kit Classics line, and we were the first company where you could actually build your kit and put it back in the original packaging, and it would safely store the model. That's a small thing, but even all along the way, you look at our website and the investment we've made on our website. It is probably it is incredibly custom. There are millions of lines of code that have been written for us, so that when, in the e-com world, commerce isn't set up to take a pre-order and bill you whenever the product comes in. It's built to bill you immediately. And so this system, we can actually take a pre-order. We can take an in-stock order. It'll split it automatically. And then when the product comes in, we can run a billing, and it'll literally, if you have a credit card on file, it'll go out and it'll look for all the orders. If you have placed orders at different times. It'll combine them all together. It'll invoice the credit card. It'll send you an email if your card's not on file. It'll keep track of everything. It'll go through a cancellation process on a certain date. And we can really manage pre-orders. I mean, that's where the $1,000 pre-order guarantee came from, because we're so confident that the system is robust enough to do that. And then it goes way beyond that. We'll have a program for clubs here in the not too distant future that'll be absolutely groundbreaking. No one's ever done in the model railroad industry. We're working on a loyalty program and a ton of things. That's just on the web side of the house. And then service side of the house, I mentioned the pre-order guarantee. No one's ever done something like that before as well. So we're always looking as a whole business. What can we do to push that envelope? Back in April, we had a product development summit. Most of our team is here in Tennessee, but product development is spread across the country. And we brought them all into Tennessee, and we totally turned upside down how we do product development so that we can move things through the process more quickly, so that we can have better visibility to it. So that whole innovation, I mean, it goes way, way beyond product. It is at the core of everything that we do.
Well, as somebody who has spent quite a bit of time on your website looking through and dreaming and checking things out, by the way, it's addictive too. So, but what's nice, and it's exactly what you hope for from a manufacturer, and it's certainly what you also hope for anybody who's selling, is being able to categorize and break down. Like, I could go in there and by model, by road, and you can just pull it all down and narrow down the focus right to what you're looking for. It's very intuitive. It's excellent. And you talk about all the background stuff that we don't even get to see, but for the user, it really is. It's done very well organized. It hits all the points as far as you don't have to scroll very far to get to where you need to go. Everything's right at the top of the fold, as I like to call it, yep, and above the fold. And
I want to say thank you for that, because it's been a lot of growing pains. We are on our third web platform. This is our third custom build. We are literally into the multi 7 figures of investment on the website at this point. And it's been a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
But to hear that how much you enjoy it to get to this point, that means a lot.
I think in general, and I kind of the point, and as I'm asking you, and we're kind of learning about ScaleTrains, is what it takes. It seems like a very simple thing. Okay, manufacture trains, put together a plan, or have a plant. They put it together, they make the product, and they take it. But there's so much to it, and I'm sure that's the ton of stuff you've learned since starting ScaleTrains, and I'm sure your team as well. Just those growing pains and how much investment it takes just to get even the first product to market, let alone having a variety of things.
That's the amazing thing. You think 4 guys starting a company who had probably about 130 years of experience in the hobby and the industry would know what they're doing. Oh, were we wrong. The learning curve has been incredible. And I think the one thing that's amazed me is, and the thing that people don't realize, is how much money this business takes. It is unbelievable to me how challenging it is to cash flow this business. When we made a commitment from the very beginning that when we make a new product announcement, that you will see it, touch it, hold it, hear it, feel it, the whole senses. And to do that means all the investment has already happened. And so that investment could be 2 or 3 years upstream from the announcement. Well, for a locomotive, you're into 6 figures, usually multiple 6 figures. So there's a tremendous amount of cash that's outlaid at any given point. And in a given year, we'll announce 1 to 2 all new HO locomotives, at least one all new N-scale locomotive, probably 2 or 3 freight cars in HO, 1 or 2 in N-scale. So there's a tremendous amount of cash just in the development side, not to mention in the production side of the world too, to be able to have, we're averaging about 2 announcements a month right now. And that's kind of the sweet spot, probably 2 or 3. And that's where we want to be, because the challenge is we have to have a container landing every month. Some things that people don't think about is we have 22 employees, and their families are counting on us for a paycheck and to pay the mortgage and put food on the table and all those kind of things. And then, you couple to that your operating expenses and then your tooling investment, and your product cost. It is amazing how much rolls through our building. It blows me away every time I look at the numbers.
Yeah, I bet you it blows you away. And then you feel that heat and a little pressure, like you said, keeping 22 people employed and keeping that staff moving. And it's beyond just a hobby. It's you become an essential part of a whole bunch of people's lives and when at that level. It
is. And the good news is, though, I used to feel a lot of pressure on that. And in my faith, I've become very comfortable with God's plan. And if God's will is for us to be successful, we will be. And if it's not, we won't be. And God has a plan for every one of those employees. And if someday ScaleTrains is no longer here, He's got a plan for them too. And that was pretty hard to come to that. I don't want to say realization, but the comfort level with that. And once I was able to do that, it's become much easier. And Mike has a saying that he tells me, and especially when times are tough, he always tells me, Shane, God didn't bring us this far to fail. And I live by that, especially when times are tough. And this has actually been 2023 has probably been the hardest year yet for us as a company. 21 and 22 through COVID in our industry, if it wasn't nailed down, you were selling it.
Right.
And one of the challenges is as you go through the waves, right, as sales just went to the stratosphere, as you ramp up your purchases, you really kind of soft on it because it takes 9 to 12 months for that inventory to come in. Well, now we're kind of at that crest of the wave where we're over inventoried right now. And that's why we ran some promotions that we normally wouldn't. And the wave is now starting to crash, which is great because now the inventory that's coming in is much tighter and back to where we want it to be. But you got to weather that storm through all of the extra inventory that's sitting on the shelf.
That's kind of something at least I kind of forget about when you think about, products that you guys are developing. You got to have a basically forecasting that 12 to 18 month period ahead of what you're looking to build and then be able to predict from there. That's got to be an amazing challenge to make that and huge risk.
It is. The good news is, with the pre-order model, it helps limit the risk. But the problem is it's got its great points and it's got its not so great points. And the reason that we like it is, for the most part, except in a cycle like we are right now, it's very predictable on what you're going to sell when the shipment comes in. So our goal is usually to be about 80 to 90% pre-sold when a shipment lands. And that extra 10% should last us about 30 to 60 days. And then we're on to the next thing. Because for us, we would rather run out of stock on a product and make more. So, if you want an AC 4400 in UP, there's plenty of road numbers. We'll do more road numbers. And because we'd rather turn that inventory. It's that turn that allows you to invest in all the new projects that are in the pipeline. So rather than having that money sitting on the shelf, let's put that money into new projects. And that's really what drives the market anyway. But we're forecasting out, like I'm right now working on the 2025 and early 2026 production schedule.
Wow.
It's already out there, but it's like now we're saying, okay, we got to firm it up because if we don't, we won't have production slots for those products. And then the design calendars or the new project calendar is actually all the way out through almost 2026 at this point, because we have to be working on the research for that project now to be able to announce something in late 25 into 26. So a lot of those projects are pretty much put to bed for 25, starting to work on 26.
So you're not flying by the seat of your pants by any extreme. You've got a plan, and that's pretty amazing that you're thought out to 25 and 26. And I guess you have to be to just try to stay ahead of things and keep things rolling. I know that when I walk up to you and we talk at the National Train Show, and you and I had a conversation back in Springfield, and of course I've got all my brilliant ideas I bring with me, and it's kind of giving me more of an appreciation of when I throw a thing at you and say, hey, why don't you make X? And you go, I can just kind of see the mind rolling and whatnot. I'm starting to get an idea of what might be going through the head of Shane Wilson and all these things that have to be considered. But I am still curious. When you select a project, we talked about some of your early stuff, but even today, when you select a project, what are some of the considerations that you're making even before you decide, okay, yes, we're going to put this on the production schedule? What are some of the things that you have to think about before you even write that down?
Boy, there's a lot that goes into that, right? We look at a lot of different variables. How many railroads owned that particular product? How many different paint schemes are available for those railroads? Are there any specialty paint schemes, things like Pride and Service or CSX Heritage or NS Heritage? What era is it from? How has it ever been done before? If it's been done before, can you do it where someone who owns that product would either sell it or put it in the display case and buy new and put it on their railroad? What was the longevity on the real railroad? Does it have a cult following? That's where the SDL 39 came from.
Yeah.
And different railroads sell at different pace. The big guys also, right? Union Pacific, BNSF, CSX, but there are other railroads from the past that have strong followings. And, you're pretty safe doing something from like a Rio Grande or a Chessie system.
Right.
And there's others out there, Conrail, whatever it might be. And there's some that we keep close to the vest. I don't think some other manufacturers may have hit yet in depth. And so you know what those railroads are just because of the time that you've been in the industry. And then we look at complementary products. Some folks say we do a lot of modern, and we do, but you can have an all GE front on your railroad. You can have a Dash 9, AC 4400, ES 44, ET 44. Mm-hmm. All power on the all ScaleTrains power leading a train that you're running. So we look at all those factors. Sometimes it in the past, and it's really snake bit us, we sometimes took the path of least resistance. And what I mean by that is, hey, we have builder's drawings and paint lettering diagrams and photography for this item. We're working on this other project, but we don't have enough information. Let's shoehorn this project in, and then we'll finish this other. Well, that's really come back to bite us. There's been a couple of projects that have not been as successful as we've needed. And for us, kind of a rule of thumb, on a locomotive, we want to make enough money on that first production run that will recover our tooling investment, and we can run our operating expenses for about a month. On a freight car, the goal is to tool something that we recover that tooling investment, and we can get enough money out of it to run the company maybe for a third to half of the month. And some of these projects that we've taken that path of least resistance have not returned the revenue like we've needed. And that's one of the reasons for the summit that we had in April in product development. Now we've realigned product development. I can't share too much publicly, but we are doing a lot more to increase our library. We have over 1 million images on our server right now.
Wow.
Always on the hunt for more. If your listeners want to help in that, if they shoot digital, send us an email at ideas@scaletrains.com, or if they've got slides, we'll scan a slide collection for free. All we ask is we keep a copy, and we'll give them, of course, their slides back at a digital as well. And then we're on the hunt for builder's drawings and paint lettering diagrams and any kind of documentation that we can find. We end up buying a brass company, their entire research collection going back to the early 1970s, just so that we could have more material, because you just never know when you're working on a project, when you need that piece of information. And so we're really trying to make our library a lot more robust so that we don't take the path of least resistance. And we're starting even earlier. I see us being soon out 5 years on projects, just so that we can make sure we have enough when it comes time for the project manager to really start working on that project in earnest.
I've definitely got an outside perspective of all of this, but I can start to get an appreciation. We just, in November, we talked to Tony Cook. He was answering a question about the GE C30-7. And he was laying out all the different railroads that had this particular locomotive and then the variants. And just imagine, as ScaleTrains, as I know ScaleTrains, shooting for that high level of detail and accuracy, to follow along with all of these different variants from every railroad. They change a little bit here or there. And then, of course, the C30-7A, and, there's other variants. And just in knowing that, I can even imagine outside of that, when big customers are ordering, they get what they want, they make a change here or there, and you guys are trying to follow along and nail all those different variants. It's got to be a massive challenge.
I'll give you a couple on that. So first, the SD40-2, when we started that project, it's pretty funny. That was one of the early projects we did. And as you add detail, of course, you add cost. And we came up with about 6 or 7 production runs. And the product development team, they keep wanting to do this version, that variation. And finally, I'm like, guys, we've got to make some money. So let's tool this first batch. And then after about the 6th or 7th run, we'll come back and we'll do more. And so we spent about 3 years working on the research and the design. Earlier this year, we announced, I think it's the 8th run of SD40-2s and a bunch of new variations, including the 40-2B. Well, we have enough variations now that we could literally run 40-2s about once or twice a year for the next 20 years and never repeat the same railroad, paint scheme, or era if we wanted to.
Wow.
That's how much variety. And from a cost standpoint, if you take both groups of tooling, all the research that went into it, the travel, all those things, we're right at $750,000 invested in the 40-2 project.
Wow.
Now, to take that to another level, here's what's even crazier. I get kind of a kick out of people with modern GEs, right? We hear this every time we announce another run of something. Another GEVO, just what we need. And the funny part there is we are actually working on some new variants of the ES44s that have never been done before. And PD is telling me that when we finish this next group, the ES44 is going to be more complex than the SD40-2. There's actually more variety on the GEVO than anything that we've ever done before.
Wow.
We're working on, for instance, on the 5 or the 6 CSX heritage units that are announced. Mm-hmm. There's actually some variations in those heritage units that no one's ever done. And we're going back to do some tooling to make sure that we can do them accurately.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's just so much to it. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, and it comes up to the show title, Curb Your Enthusiasm, where you want to build all these variants, and you're model railroad guys, and you get it, and you want to produce this, but you got to kind of, in a sense, curb that and look at it, okay, let's take this a step at a time, because it's a major undertaking, as you've described.
One of the things I don't think people quite grasp, especially as we get into like rebuilds, right? So we've had a lot of requests to the UP SD40N, and that's coming up on an announcement probably in the next run or two. And we've had to create, just to do 6 different road numbers, required 6 different engineering drawings and 6 different versions. We could not find 2 SD40Ns exactly alike.
Wow.
And that's why it's so hard to offer that model, because to do more road numbers, you've got to invest more money in creating that product. We're working on, I don't think it's a secret that, we did the -9s. Now we've done the AC 4400s. Gosh, it would make sense to do the rebuilds next, right? And looking at something like a Norfolk Southern AC 44 C6M, you look at like the Sonic bonnets. Yeah. All that's easy, right? They did 5 colors and 10 road numbers, and oh yeah. Oh no. When you start to really get into it,
yeah.
And then you want to do some with the regular NS logo and then some with the sine wave logo.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. They're all different. And trying to come up with a grouping that allows you to have all of the details exactly the same is next to impossible.
Perhaps an investment in the future would have been you to take a ride over to just by the Texas Motor Speedway where Wabtec is, and gone in and just yelled at them. Build them all the same. Make my life easier. Do them all the same. But
it's funny. Like when BNSF did the 25th anniversary units, we were actually we knew about that project 9 months before it was announced. We were at the very beginning of that project, and we went to BNSF and we're like, "Look, it'd be really great if you could pick road numbers in this series or that series or this series, not one. So that was one of the reasons we were delayed almost 9 months on those, because we had to go back and tool a lot of different things so that we could make sure that all 10 road numbers were accurate for each individual road number. And all 10 are different from each other. Not one of them is the same.
Wow. Yeah, those decisions that are being made out in the prototype world that are affecting you in the model railroad world, and that's a really neat connection. But before we run out of time here, there was one topic I definitely wanted to cover, and I think it kind of you led into it with, as a kid, and 16, and I say kid, but you were very much a young adult at that point, and you hit the road, you're selling product, and now you've and since gone back to that and hitting the road in the summers with the ScaleTrains road trip. And I think it's a pretty phenomenal thing to be able to once again be at the foot of the customer that you've done and get to be out and amongst the people and that. I want you to talk a little bit about that experience. Tell us how that even got started. How did the ScaleTrains road trip come to fruition?
So you might remember a band back in the 80s called George Thorogood and the Destroyers.
Yeah, sure.
And, they sang Bad to the Bone. And if you don't know their history, they got a record contract by doing, the record company says, look, if you'll do 50 concerts in 50 states in 50 days, and you drive to all of them except Alaska and Hawaii, you could earn a record contract. And they did that. And I was like, man, that is just the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And I'd always had this dream with ScaleTrains of going out on the road and telling our story directly to the customer, right?
Yeah.
And to potential customers. And when COVID happened and we were no longer having shows, it's like, well, there's budget now. And so I had this idea we would do 50 states in 50 weeks. And then I started looking at the logistics of that. And I'm like, you're nuts. And so, but, I tempered that. And we said, well, we'll go out and we'll do all 50 states. And it's become much bigger than we ever dreamed it would be. We thought we would probably do, maybe 1 or 2 dates a state. So we'd end up at about 7,500 dates total. And we just wrapped up 100 dates in our 24th state. So we have 26 more states to go and a lot more visits to do. But it has been one of the biggest things for our company I think we could ever do. You talk about grassroots, and we're going to places that we do shows in big cities, right?
Yeah.
You name the big city and the big metro areas, and we get there. But Lord, we'll never get to a place like Bismarck, North Dakota, or just so many small places where we've been and throughout the Midwest and the Western states, and getting off the beaten path and meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how passionate our customers are for our product and our company. We've done I think one of the things I'm really most proud of is we're pretty open book and let people on the inside of what it's like to start your own company and operate your own model train company, and the challenges and the adversities and the successes. And we've been blessed. I mean, blessed beyond our wildest dreams. You look at our warehouse and our team and all of those things and the road trip, but meeting people where they are and making those one-on-one connections, people realize, we're not some nameless, faceless company. We're real people who have a passion for what we do. And as a real person, we make mistakes. And when we do, we fix them and we admit to it and we apologize and we move on. But it brings that realness of who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the road trip so special. And it kind of sounds bad, but we're almost making, I call them rabid fans almost of ScaleTrains.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic thing because, when we launch this club program soon, it'll be amazing. People will be like, so that's what the road trip is all about. And it all will mesh together. And the club will be that conduit to us, to that end customer and the potential end customer that's learning about the hobby and growing. And that's really who we are. And I'm excited to get back out on the road and kind of wrap up the road trip and I think, we've already talked about will there be a road trip 2.0 someday when we go back out and visit? There's been some amazing places we've been. Like I think of Amarillo, Texas,
Yeah.
and there's a club there that actually has the nuclear, what they would transport nuclear warheads on, the real train out back, and they've got a helium car, and then they're building an unbelievable model railroad. Absolutely going to be stunning when it's done. And they were early in it when we saw it. It's been now almost 2 years ago, and it's like someday I want to go back and when they've had a chance to make some great progress on that railroad and see it again. And there's some other places like that too. We want to go and see how things progressed.
Well, I can certainly attest that ScaleTrains and the experience, you talk about rabid fans and people that are just passionate about ScaleTrains. I can see why it may lead to a point where the Surgeon General may have to require you to put a warning on your website, because it can be addictive to see and touch and feel, and the experience, not only in person, but the product and even the packaging. What you guys have put into the packaging, when you touch the box, when you feel it, you take it out, it's just, it's quality right from the beginning. And that's what's really helps build that. It just feels good to be to spend your money buying a ScaleTrains locomotive or a box car or any of the other products that you're offering. And you've certainly expanded your offering since the start of the company, and through some acquisitions have quite an offering. But I can see why it's just an absolutely phenomenal experience.
It has been amazing. I appreciate you recognizing the package. I mean, those are all things that we've spent tremendous amount of time trying to make sure that we, we went through a brand refresh about 2 years ago now when we launched the newest website, and really put a lot of thought into what's the new logo and how can people relate to that, and can that logo stand on its own someday, like a Nike swoosh, and all those kind of things. And the packaging in you look at like the SDL 39 packaging that we just shipped the latest version, and we actually went to a full size rivet counter style box, but it's got that fold over lid with the magnets. It's all about that customer experience and making be really proud to be an owner of our product.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the R&D sessions of packaging. Like, well, no, this one doesn't feel right. Oh, let's try this one. And just those neat inside baseball things that I get giddy about, and just think that, the processes of picking boxes and, packaging and making sure it's right. But you've done it and you nailed it. That's for sure.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's funny. You go back to the turbine box, the blade blow turbine box in that leather-like case. One of my very first trips to China, it's very big for your host to take great care of you while you're there. That's a big deal. And our factory owner took us over to, believe it or not, the QVC, one of the QVC jewelry factories. Wow. And he's like, pick out anything you want, take something home to your wife and your daughter. And he told Mike to do the same thing. And the folks there were bringing us samples and showing us things, and they bring to me this large box. It was probably about yay big, and the lady does that thing where she puts it in front of me, and then she kind of opens it up, and it's got this big necklace, this jeweled necklace, and earrings and bracelet. It's whole ensemble, and it was like as she opened it, the heavens shone down on that box, because I'm like, that's the museum or the quality box that we've been dreaming about. That's kind of where that idea came from. Was it a QVC jewelry factory?
It was your Pretty Woman QVC experience of having the box open in front of you. Yeah. So that's phenomenal. Boy, I've learned so much all about Shane Wilson on this already. And, an hour flies by when you're having fun. I certainly had a lot of fun learning about your story, and I'm wildly impressed by your entrepreneurship and how that's led you to a career in model railroading. And the ScaleTrains story just continues to grow as you guys continue to put out some phenomenal products, and you're doing it right. And even like you said, when you make a mistake, you step up, you own it. And that's just all part of the process and that experience. And you've built an excellent customer experience through your work at ScaleTrains.
Well, thank you so much, Ray. As we wrap up, I do want to give a ton of credit to the 22 folks that are on our team, from our ownership to our senior leadership to everybody that's on the front lines. ScaleTrains wouldn't be who it is without our people, and we believe in hiring culture first, talent second. And it's that culture that brings the best out in who we are as a company and in our products and our services. And I really appreciate your recognition tonight of some of the things you've touched on. Some what most people would think maybe are small things like packaging or websites. And for me, it warms my heart because we put so much energy into those things and as a team. And it's not me. I'm just blessed to be able to lead a fantastic and talented group of people. I want to say thanks, Ray, so much for giving me the opportunity to come and chat with you tonight and share a little bit about me and our company and our people, and really appreciate your enthusiasm for our business. It means a lot.
Well, I certainly enjoy hearing these great stories, and you've helped lead, and I love that concept. The tangibles are the things, those the spirit, the culture are things that can't be learned easily. That, like you said, you can teach a person how to do the job, but if they come with the right mentality, they come with the right spirit and passion, and you've done an excellent job building that team. And I've interacted with some of your team, and obviously we know some of the marketing folks, and Drayton we've known him from Delay and Block already, and the phenomenal work he does, and working for ScaleTrains, doing that, the marketing side. What great selection of people that have talent and have passion in the hobby. That's certainly nice to know that when you're looking at a model railroad company, they are model railroaders. They are passionate about the hobby, and they want to put out great products, and really are our people. They're us.
That's right. Well said, Ray.
So as we're wrapping up now, I've got one more question for you. What's next for ScaleTrains? What's the next big thing for ScaleTrains? What can you tell us without getting in too much trouble tonight?
So as you probably know, we acquired a major stake in Virtual Railfan earlier this year. And we really see this as an opportunity to not only grow the ScaleTrains business, the Virtual Railfan business, but to bring model railroading to the masses. I'm talking like going back to the 1950s where everybody had a train set under the Christmas tree.
Right.
And we have some really, kind of going back to the beginning, the old ScaleTrains Big Dreams documentary, we have some big dreams for VR. And probably at Springfield, we'll start unveiling what that's going to look like. And believe it or not, I think Virtual Railfan, while it's in its infancy right now from a revenue standpoint, I think in about 5 years, maybe less, could be much larger than ScaleTrains is.
Wow. And
the audience that Virtual Railfan reaches is so far beyond the hobby industry, but beyond the model train industry. They're touching people who are train enthusiasts, armchair train enthusiasts of every age, from kids to you name all the way up through old age, and we're already in development of products that will be specifically for Virtual Railfan and outside of model trains. Think very revolutionary, and how we can entice someone to buy a product. It might be model trains, or might be something more than model trains, but introduces them to ScaleTrains, and in that process grows the folks that are model railroaders. The biggest magazine circulation in our industry is probably about 80,000 or so. Mm-hmm. VR right now is reaching 650,000 unique visitors a month.
Wow.
We believe we could easily push that over 1 million uniques every month. That's 10, 15 times what we're reaching right now in the model railroad world. And with that, I think will come some revenue that will allow us to really invest in ways that we go way, way beyond anything that we could dream of. Right? I hearken back to when Bachman bought a full page ad on the back of USA Today for a couple of years, and that's how Easy Track became a brand name, right?
Right.
That's how, and you look back at what Lionel did in the 50s and how they became a household name. And when I make this next statement, I don't want this to sound bold and I don't want it to sound conceited, but I've challenged our team to how could ScaleTrains become a household name someday?
Right.
And so there's a big glimpse into the future.
Yeah. Well, you're dreaming it up. You guys are, living it. You're creating plan and moving forward. It's very just amazing. I can't come up with any better word to describe. Just really inspirational to take and gone from where you've started to now, and your team and what they're able to do with ScaleTrains, and then the future. I'm so looking forward to seeing you in Springfield and learning more about those plans for ScaleTrains and watching as you guys just take off towards the stars.
Well, thank you. And, we probably have a couple surprises too. Look for, if everything comes together, we'll have an all-new HO locomotive. We'll have an all-new N-scale locomotive and an all-new N-scale freight car to unveil at Springfield.
Well, we'll have to hedge bets on what those are. I'll get Tony and we'll try to gamble a little bit and see if we can pick out what it's going to be, and see if my ideas at scaletrains.com emails have come to fruition or not. I always put in the subject line, Shane said this was going to be a good idea. So maybe that'll help me. Maybe it won't. We'll see.
That one will probably get you next.
Yeah, next. Yeah, goodbye. Yep, spam. This one's gone. But Shane, thank you so much for joining me on Around the Layout tonight. It was great to get to know you and your story.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.